Number one, did you discuss Joe Biden at all during that meeting yesterday with the Ukrainian president? And number two, can you assure Ukraine that the holdup of that money has absolutely nothing to do with efforts, including by Rudy Giuliani, to try to dig up dirt on the Biden family?
Well, on the first question, the answer is no. But with President Zelensky yesterday, we discussed America's support for Ukraine and the upcoming decision the president will make on the latest tranche of financial support in great detail.
Donald Trump was golfing during the time earlier this month when the White House said that he wouldn't travel to Poland for a World War II commemoration because he needed to monitor Hurricane Dorian. And so it was Vice President Mike Pence who traveled to Poland and took what was planned to be a president-to-president meeting with the recently elected leader of Ukraine. So with Ukraine at the center of the whistleblower complaint that is sparking fresh calls for impeachment, could Pence be as much in the barrel as Trump? Joining me now, Joyce Vance, MSNBC contributor and former U.S. attorney, and Natasha Bertrand, MSNBC contributor and national security correspondent for Politico. And Natasha, I'm going to start with you. I want to play for you Senator Chris Murphy, who was on with Andrea Mitchell on Friday, talking about the Rudy Giuliani part of this scandal, and then I want to circle back to Pence. Take a listen.
Giuliani, on behalf of the president, has been very clear that he's trying to get the Ukrainians to meddle in the 2020 election. Now, Zelensky told me that he had no intent to do that, but he was also very concerned about why the security aid was being cut off. And even if there wasn't this explicit promise made that if you investigate Biden, we'll give you your aid, that certainly was the impression amongst many in Ukraine who couldn't help but connect these demands they were getting from the president's political representatives to investigate his opponents and the sudden, surprising cutoff of security aid.
So, Natasha, here's the thing about that quote and also what we've heard from both Rudy Giuliani and what we just heard from Mike Pence. If Rudy Giuliani was, in theory, making the pitch about investigating Biden, it doesn't seem that there'd be much reason for Pence to do it as well. But Pence specifically said on the first question, no, that he did not discuss Joe Biden at all during the meeting. So he was explicitly no. The answer to the second part, his second answer was, but we, with President Zelensky yesterday, we discussed America's support for Ukraine and the upcoming decision the president will make on the latest tranche of financial support in great detail. So he talked about the money that was being withheld by the Trump administration. Any reporting on whether or not this was simply a bifurcation of resources, that Giuliani's out there pitching for dirt, but it's Pence that's there to deliver the message about the money?
Yeah, we don't have any reporting to that effect yet, but it would be shocking, obviously, if Mike Pence wasn't aware of the president's disdain for the Ukrainians, and that goes back a long time. He thought that they helped Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election, and he has said to aides that he believes the Ukrainians have always been against him. Of course, that also factors into his admiration for Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is obviously essentially at war with Ukrainians. He's supporting the eastern Ukrainians in their fight against Kiev. So anything that the president does that undermines their security and their ability to push back against Russia is essentially another aid to Vladimir Putin. Now, with regard to the military assistance aid, the timing on that is a bit unclear because the aid was held up in about July. The Ukrainians didn't really learn that the aid was held up until August. So when President Trump had that conversation with Zelensky on, I think, July 25th, it's not clear that they actually knew at that point that the aid was being held up, but the president did. And so when he was talking to Zelensky about, his desire to see them look into Joe Biden, he knew that he had that stick. And the Ukrainians, though, I want to emphasize, they seem to see right through this. A top Ukrainian official actually recently told the Daily Beast, look, we know exactly what's going on here. It's very clear that the president is upset about his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, being in prison. Paul Manafort was, of course, the former top aide to Viktor Yanukovych, the former Ukrainian president who was exiled to Russia. He obviously feels like Joe Biden is a big threat to his presidency and to his 2020 reelection campaign. And so unless there's a formal request here from the president to the Ukrainians that will be very public and where the president has to justify asking for that, the Ukrainians have said, we're not going to play ball here.
Yeah, and let me just put that timeline up again. And we played it in the last, but I'm going to put it up again just for the audience to go back again. This July 25th phone call between Trump and the Ukrainian president, that is perhaps what triggered, and we say perhaps because it's not confirmed, what triggered the whistleblower complaint. Then you go on, you have Coates resigning. We just heard in our last block that was alarming. That raised alarms among intelligence professionals. Then you have the deputy DNI told to resign. She does resign. Then you've got the whistleblower complaint filed on August 12th. Then you have Trump withholding that aid in late August, but to Tasha's point, Ukraine might not have even known about it. Then this investigation is launched in September, and then you have the hold lifted with Mitch McConnell just now on this past Thursday changing his mind and backing $250 million. Oh, sorry, that's separate from that. Sorry about that. So you have the hold lifted on September 12th. Let me go to you on this very quickly, Joyce, because here's the question for Mike Pence. Mike Pence has been sort of severed from all of the other questions that are relating to potential impeachment for Donald Trump that the House is wrestling with right now. But if Pence, as Natasha said, went in knowing why the aid was being held up, went in and spoke to the leader of Ukraine, knowing what stick the administration had over them, and in that way was drawn in to this idea of using that stick to try to get what they wanted from Ukraine, does he then face the jeopardy of perhaps also being drawn in to the questions of impeachment?
You know, Joy, I think the short answer, like Natasha said, is that there's not really any reporting on this yet. And that should be really troubling to all of us, because Pence shows up on your timeline at a key point, and we need to know the answer to that question, because if the answer is yes, that Pence was explicitly part of some sort of a scheme to either bribe or extort the Ukrainians, then the American people need to know that, and Congress needs to take appropriate action. So the troubling question here is, with the Justice Department that's apparently sidelined or perhaps actively in cahoots with the White House, who does that investigation? That falls to Congress. Congress isn't getting a lot of cooperation out of the White House. And we're at the point where we need to call this what this is. This is a major threat to the rule of law. People in Congress on both sides of the aisle need to set aside their political affiliation and get to the bottom of this, because we have a president and now possibly a vice president